Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live session. Today's topic is accelerating SAP implementations while ensuring quality. And quite an interesting topic. How to go faster but with higher quality is an interesting juxtaposition. I'd like to welcome everybody here, and to get things started, I'd love to hear where everybody's joining from. You'll notice on your screen there's some comments there. I just posted one telling you that I'm calling in from sunny Arizona today, and love to hear where everybody else is calling in from. As well, as we go, please feel free to add some comments with questions, because although I've got some prepared questions for our guests today, we'd love to hear from the audience and make sure that we kind of address all topics that are on your mind. I'm privileged to be joined by two guests today. First off, we have Patrick Fiegel, who's VP and Global Head of Strategic Product Partnerships at Tricentis. And as well, we're joined by Bob Cummings, who's the CEO of LeapGreat and a 30-plus year SAP industry veteran. So welcome to both of you.
Good afternoon, good morning.
With Patrick, and I'd love to get things started to tell me a bit about Tricentis and what about your collaboration with SAP?
Yeah, certainly. Very happy to share a little bit here, calling today from Frankfurt at the airport, actually. So I found a quiet spot and I'm happy to be here with you online. Tricentis is the global leader in enterprise testing solutions and made its name about 15 years back by really putting testing in the hands of the business users. Testing traditionally was more affiliated with scripting, technical means, let's say, to conduct the quality assurance. But as we speak about enterprise applications, obviously the knowledge about how processes run resides typically with employees who use these systems. So that is where everything started. And over the years, the company grew and became reputable, and SAP selected us as a partner for the space. As you might know, SAP has certain areas of their tool stack that they do not develop by themselves, but they invite partners to, occupy that white space. And so we have been the Solix test automation partner since 2020. And with that, we are a component in the integrated end-to-end tool chain for SAP. This is something that combines application lifecycle management with process management and enterprise architecture management. And the organization around this is not just technical integration, but also guiding customers on how to use that integrated tool chain. And on both ends, the technical and the methodological, we collaborate tightly with SAP and keep further integrating and further expanding the value of that tool chain.
And Patrick, for somebody who doesn't know Solix, what does that mean? Being a Solix partner?
Solutions extensions are products of third parties that are sold on SAP paper. So it's particularly easy for customers to consume SAP software and third-party software under a common commercial framework.
Okay, so it's almost as if you're like an SAP product, the way that customers can consume it.
Almost, right. It is the next thing to white labeling.
Okay, great. And Bob, you've been, I don't want to, put an age or date on you, but I know you've been doing implementations for a lot of years, back to probably the R2 days. What's your experience with testing and quality on these ERP projects?
Yeah, so thanks for letting me be here today again, and great to see you again, Patrick. Happy to collaborate on this, and thanks for joining us. Testing is one of those things I think that I've been a tester. I've run testing programs both on the software side at SAP as well as with customer projects, and it's always a very, very interesting and very, I would say, stressful time. You have a lot of you need a lot of patience because you're always waiting for the things to be ready to be tested, and inevitably that's often delayed, and it's often very very stressful to make sure that the testing is done. And the reason is often there's a lot of backloaded projects. So I was on one project actually where the customer had been so experienced with this that they actually blocked out one entire year. I mean, this was a very big company, but they blocked out one entire year where they basically said no more design changes, nothing. We're just going to do pure testing for that last year. And that was one of the actually best and smoothest projects I've ever been on. But most of the time one doesn't allocate as much time, and you kind of get crushed before go live. And so I think testing has come a long way, especially with tools and with what Tricentis brings to SAP. So I think times have gotten a lot better, but it's still a stressful time. I'm sure Patrick would agree.
Yeah,
testing is like, it's like going to the dentist. Yeah, so it's nothing that you do for a hobby. It is something that you realize you want to do next time early enough so that it doesn't catch you by surprise what you're trying to keep healthy and to deliver, right? Which of course our body is obvious in this context, but that's kind of the same perspective I think that organizations have on IT systems.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about pulling teeth, because I think often, people see these ERP projects as, very painful, high risk. And I know we've examined that in prior conversations on LeapGreat's LinkedIn Lives here. And I'm wondering, based on the fact there still is a high failure rate on ERP projects after 40 years of doing them, I'm wondering what's the perspective of, testing on that? Because as Bob mentioned, not all companies can freeze everything for a year and just test as part of it. But I'm wondering, what's unique about SAP or S/4HANA and that people need to think about when considering getting kind of like a quality result? Patrick, you want to comment there?
I think it is the complexity or the breadth, let me rather say that, of the processes that the ERP system covers, and the many interdependencies between configuration, master data, maybe things that were developed for the customer to extend the system to provide additional interface options, for instance. So if you think of this here in terms of the problem space, it is very, very large, right? And you can, of course, think about only so many things as you configure the system, as you prepare the system, which experts do. And of course, everybody's well intended to, do it in the right way. But it just becomes unwieldy because of the simple space that the problem space that you're building here, the potential combinations that you might not have thought about. And so it hasn't really fundamentally changed in this regard, because this has been with us for many, many years. What has changed, I think, is the pressure and the expectation to deliver faster, and of course also to deliver with a higher quality. So I think companies have started to move from putting people to do these things and perform testing manually, maybe then offshoring this to reduce the cost associated. And as Bob was saying, some companies have enormous expenditures in this realm. If we look at statistics, we see that the efforts in transformation projects that are spent on testing, if done properly, go between 30 and 50%. Yeah? So this is an enormous potential that can be optimized. And so this is where the modern shift is going towards automating this, trying to get things done also in a way that is test driven. So entering the transformation already with a quality mindset, and not to wait until 5 minutes before 12. So that is the story with SAP in particular. It is not limited to SAP by any means. So if you look at other ERP vendors, or if you look at integration across software as a service platforms, you will have a very, very similar situation there. It's only that we're in this SAP space, and we see these companies undertaking massive implementations or upgrades, and so we know about this from a first hand experience.
And I guess I gather, Patrick, that when you look at what it was like with, say, for example, with ECC, where it was kind of a bit more of one more monolithic application, where now with S4 you're tying together a lot of different applications, that complexity that you mentioned probably just gets a little more exponentially, it grows as a result here.
That is true. It is true also for two very specific reasons. One is that the development no longer is executed in the same workbench. So what was done even 30 years ago, you would configure the SAP system. You would also develop extensions, so customer-specific codes. That software that was basically coded was done in the very same workbench as SAP would develop their software. Today, the approach is different. You do this in a side-by-side platform as a service environment, so you need to master different technology. You have integration points. Any integration point is a potential cause of failure, is an area that you want to inspect. So the more fragmented the tool landscape is, the more fragmented the technology stack is, the higher actually the risk exposure is, and that is where the mitigation needs to keep up, and it is keeping up, right? So it is, I would say, generally speaking, the quality mindset is much more firmly rooted in the ERP space today as it was when I started. I remember that we were joking that testing happens in production, and it was not only a joke.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering, Bob, from your perspective and your experience, are there any challenges that you saw with customers or other things you would illustrate around this?
Actually, Patrick's absolutely right. I have been on projects where testing was done after go live, and they just move into thing. I mean, you see a lot of 11th hour, or let's say even 13th hour situations where you have to do error fixing, and I've seen that so often. The problem is that one prioritizes design and build, and there's the pressure at the end is you make the assumption, well, it's going to work, but the problem is the devils are always in the details, and you don't often see those devils. And then if you leave your testing window too small, then of course you're going to go into production with a semi-tested system. And unfortunately, it happens a lot. I've been on a lot of projects where we see that happening, but I've been on other projects where they really take this seriously, and they treat the beginning of the testing window as go live. And those customers who do that, they have the best, and they tell the people, listen, you're not allowed to go beyond that, right? Pretend this is go live. And it's not just pretend, they actually, in their governance, they have a very strong, and that was like that customer I told you about just now. I had that year, they said on 1st of January, we're doing pre-go live. And what they meant by pre-go live was they would leave all the rest of the following year for testing. And it was a very, very smooth start. They had very few defects, but that's usually the exception to the rule. Most of the time when things, well, there won't be that many issues in testing. And then when you get there might not be that many, but one of the issues might be a huge one, right? And then you have to go back and fix a lot of stuff and then test again, so it's really a problem.
Yeah, I'm curious, Patrick, how has testing and quality assurance kind of evolved, as well from the methods and tools available over these last decade or so?
I can proudly say that we have been one of the change agents for that development. I alluded to it when I said that the company is famous for bringing testing into the hands of the key user. Of course, that by itself is no novelty, because manual testing was also done by key users. But enabling those key users to be effective by means of test automation and by what we refer to as model-based test automation. So that is the ability to define test cases in a way that is very intuitive and also allows to build a great number of test cases from reusable components. The testing effort that I alluded to, this big 30 to 50%, a great component of that is the authoring time. So the time you spend in actually building the tests, the execution time is fairly nominal, but making that simpler, reducing the amount of manual maintenance that is there, that is one thing that has, substantially improved. The second thing that I would say or call out, there are many things we could go into detail, but one thing that particular draws the attention of customers is the ability to perform risk-based testing. And what is that? Risk-based testing is making sure that you are not only testing, so quote unquote doing the right thing, but you're also testing what you should be testing. Yeah? So doing things right, yeah? And that is where if you don't apply risk-based testing, customers would only achieve a coverage of maybe 40%. So these are numbers that we've been tracking across our customer base over many years of the pre-Tricentis state, and then leave basically 60% uncovered, but namely not of the total functionality, but of the risk exposure. Yeah, so of the risk exposure, only really the average coverage is 40%, unless you have means of making sure that you focus on testing what is really necessary, and I'll talk about that in a second. And at the same time, there is a number that is quite shocking, and that is that 60% of tests that are being executed are redundant. Yeah? So there is a lot of effort in vain, so to speak, right? And so what is the trick here? The trick is to bring together the risk impact of a certain change that is going through a system with the test specific to that change and to the area of impact of that change, right? And by doing so, now you're really just doing what you need to be doing. So you're minimizing your testing efforts, but you're achieving a very, very big result, right? And if you proceed with those means, you can achieve a dramatic impact on your projects, right? You can accelerate the project because now you're really focusing just on what needs to be done. A customer that we like very much, Duke, who implemented C4C, so the quote to cash platform of SAP, and have the largest implementation in the US. They were able to test 40 times faster than prior to using Tricentis, and landed their implementation 7 months ahead of schedule. So that's how impactful the change of ways of working in testing has been to the industry.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. And I know, Bob, in prior sessions, well, we talked about, the way to impact projects and move things up was, to address this issue where many projects are kind of backloaded and how you can pull things up front. And I guess testing would be one of those ones that if you can start testing earlier would be critical. I know you had a chart that you talked to people about. Maybe it'd be worthwhile for you to comment about that. This idea of doing things early and where projects are traditionally backloaded and how that affects quality.
Yeah, so this chart actually is a very, very old chart. You've most probably seen it. I think I remember when I was in the very early days of SAP, I joined in 1994. I remember somebody showing us this chart or something similar. I think these are called McLeary curves. There was a guy called McLeary who saw that in computer software design, but it applies the same in applications, where if you see at the bottom running across, that might be that's your project, right? So that's just the activate phases you see there. Then you see the green line that goes from top left down to top right. The bottom right is like the ability to impact design as you go along, of course, reduces as you get into build. And of course, the cost, the red line, goes up, or the cost and effort goes up as you wait later to make a change in design. So of course the key is, how do you get that early? How do you make sure that as early as possible you can make changes? So you see the blue mountain there that's in the middle. This is how traditionally projects run, where at the beginning you're in a conceptual phase, and then once you get to realization, that's where the lion's part of the heavy lifting is, and in there somewhere is also the testing. But if you discover problems, of course, they get more expensive and more difficult the later you wait, and sometimes you have to even delay the project and stuff like that. So the earlier you can test, the earlier you can bring in design changes, the better. So that's what that beige or golden mountain on the left is, and we call that front loading, where we try to do the heavy lifting right up front, so that a customer can immediately see very quickly what the system does, how it acts, so that one can get at those little devils in the details that I was talking about very early, so that they can say, hey, that looks good, but actually we do something a little bit different. Often people see that much too late, and it's only late in the process. So this is kind of the idea, and this, together with Patrick, we're often thinking about this: how can we move the testing to day one, which sounds a bit silly, but we actually believe that's possible. You can actually start thinking about testing and do it in parallel to design, and the better you do it, the smoother your project will be, like you heard from Duke, or like you see in these cases where people take that very seriously, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'd like to drill down a little bit on these traditional approaches just to understand a little bit of the problems with that. Because I know there's some key challenges that you would point out, Bob. Do you want to maybe, talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge, I would say the biggest challenge is, software is not like cars. When you're building a car, you can see the stuff, right? When you're building a system, you can't really see it. You're always abstracting from it, and only late you actually see it. So you get the visibility on these projects very late. And it's usually in the realization phase. The first three phases on projects are often a lot of fun. There's a lot of discussion around pictures, around data, around architecture, and then suddenly all that stuff comes together, and then it gets very hot in the realization phase, right? And suddenly you hear people say things like, "Oh, I didn't realize it worked like that. I understood it differently," or "Where is this field that we used to have?" or all this stuff, and then you start going into this swirl, and there's a lot of work streams working, and they come together, and then of course then they come together even more closely when you get to testing, and that's where you realize, oops, this thing we got wrong, or that thing we got wrong, and then you have to try and scramble to make the changes. And unfortunately, sometimes if you've missed not only the little devils but the big ones, you sometimes have to go back to design at the beginning, and you have to discover again, and you have to put the project on hold and stuff, and you have to go, and there's, unfortunately, the statistics show that there's a lot of that. But I believe that if you can do two things, if you can take testing very seriously, and if you can do testing very early, through a system that's already there, then your whole journey is a completely different one, and it's a much smoother, and like Patrick said, if you do it properly, you might even go early, or you might even extend your scope, and that's the benefit of doing that. So I would say testing is really a very, very high priority, and it can overcome a lot of these issues if you can do it very early, right?
Yeah. You want to comment on
I would
that?
fully, yeah, agree. No, I think I would love to. I think the key point here, right, is to using testing as a requirement specification instrument. Okay, so what people do in software development, they call test-driven development, is, before you even finish your coding, you specify the function, that validates that what your software is supposed to do, or your function is supposed to do, can be asserted, by this test function. And of course, software for ERP and so forth, you cannot do this, and you shouldn't be trying to do this programmatically. This would be impossible. But you can specify what the intended user experience is. Yeah. So what am I, desiring to show as I go through the workflow end to end? What do I want to see if I look at the data that goes into the workflow? People sometimes think that testing is purely validating, that the screens happen in proper sequence and that we have a green checkmark at the end. Well, we are talking about information technology, and sometimes we forget it is about information. Technology is just the means. The information needs to be right, and that also needs to be tested, right? So this is going from the input information to the output information. And then of course there is the performance dimension. So what is technically called non-functional testing, making sure that the system is able to hold the load even if many users work on it, and perform still in the same way. Yeah? So the moving of these two, I don't know, dinosaur shapes, or the one from the back to the front, that Bob was talking about, is really predicated on not just starting to test somehow, but making testing part of the systematic way of how you implement. Yeah? And considering the test case as a means of articulating what do I want to achieve at the end of the day. And then, as the saying goes, start with that end in mind, and now you will be able to optimize to really catching things the moment they happen, and then avoiding that they have a larger impact and getting the errors remediated and having an accelerated delivery of your project.
Great. And I know, Bob and Patrick, that you guys have been working together to solve this issue of being able to test early. I'm wondering, Bob, if you might be able to talk to a bit of the synergy between the two companies, and maybe at the same time, like how you're trying to solve this problem of early testing in combination.
Yeah, sure. So what we try to do is basically, I don't know if you want to throw up that chart. Yeah, this is a good one which you can kind of accompany. If you look along the top, those are the activate phases. What we basically do is, most of the world's paradigm is design then build, right? What we try to do is change it to build and then refine. So in a way, what we do is using special tools and automation technologies. What we try to say is, why don't we do a dress rehearsal right even before the project starts? And what we'll do is we'll take a look at the customer and see how closely we can already today, with a kind of a quick and dirty implementation, get a system up and running as close as possible in a clean core and best practice, just to show, and then work backwards from there, right? We call it front loading, which just means instead of having a backloaded project, you have a front loaded. And if you look, we do two things. We build the system, but we also build so it's called your working system, but we also build your working project. What does that mean? It means the work stream pieces are there that are necessary for the project. So there's a lot of tooling today that goes into projects. In the old days, we used to just put in R3 or ECC, but now of course you have a lot of project tools. You have Cloud ALM, you have Signavio, you have LeanIX, you have Tricentis. You have all of these tools which will help you. And so what we say is, let's get them in place on day one, and we can start working on the processes that we come up with. Now, granted, we'll probably get 50% of it wrong, because of course the devils are in the details. If you work very quickly, you have to get that there. But so we really mean it honestly when we say, why don't you start testing on day one? And then most people will say, well, that's a bit crazy. And you say, well, it's not crazy if you already have a system. It might be a 50 or 60% system, but it's pretty close to what the customer will do, and we know what the customer wants to do, and we know what their scope is. And then start testing that, because then you get early practice with the testing. And so we have Tricentis loaded. So Patrick and I have been working to see how can we actually get the situation that in the front load we can actually get Tricentis loaded, and we get the connectivity. And we have some tooling that helps us to do this. So in some of our tooling, which you see here, where we have like a cockpit for business users to get acquainted with the system and stuff, we actually take the best practice and the content, and we have an integration with Tricentis as well as with Cloud ALM, which is a kind of a triangle, because Tricentis is also integrated with Cloud ALM. And so we try to get that running as quickly as possible in the early part, and we navigate you there. So it's basically all around. At the end of the day, what Patrick and I are trying to do is just raise the profile of testing and make it much earlier, so that customers can get moving quicker and prioritize the testing. So you're like Patrick just said, you're doing the testing along with as you're developing, right?
Maybe Patrick, you can comment of how on that, maybe that chart, how Tricentis sort of fits into that part.
Yeah. So what we and I think we had some build on this here to show. Yeah, thank you very much. How the collaboration really happens here, and it is basically by providing the necessary means for that early usage of tests in the project, and by tying it really into the way how the project is being executed, as Bob was just alluding to, the sort of build and refine approach that you guys have, which is really predicated on using a very template based and very building block based approach to configuring the system, makes it possible to have the equivalent test scripts available also from the very beginning. So there is a process design, there is a scope of applications under the processes, and there are the test scripts already from the very beginning available. And with that, you can effectively execute them as early as you want, and from there, during the time, even as you go into the project, look at the scope that is considered finished or it's relatively mature, validating it and then feeding back to the teams, making sure that you remove the smaller problems here, and then you continue along the path of having a very, very sound configured system as you're processing your entire scope. Then, of course, you take this further and you look at other areas that are not on the surface, where you look at integration points, where you look at, as I said, aspects that go into the depth of data integrity and performance. These are typically things that you would do a little bit later, because now you need a substantial base, process base, to really look at things like performance, for instance, and then you ultimately build in automation for repeating the test, so that no longer it is done to validate have the requirements being fulfilled. So no longer it is an acceptance test, but now it becomes a process-centric regression test, which you will fire then on a regular basis, and where you will apply the limitations of risk-based testing, that you end up firing, although you're doing this automatically, only the test cases that are really relevant to cover the changes that have been going through the system. And ultimately, again, you look at the effects at the data level. So this is where you run then integration tests that may even span S4 and your integrated systems, and look at have we achieved the proper information result that was intended. So touch points, you can really say, throughout the entire process. Bob and I, both are friends of the word methodology. So, that's one of these things that divides people, and, we both love it. Can get overboard, I would say, but I think in this case and in this industry, it is one of the ingredients of success. If you do things in a very well planned out way, and if you're able then also to accelerate that, right, then you deliver what we're talking about here, quality at speed, and this very thought out synchronization of the usage of the tools along the entire transformation path here. That is what we have achieved, and this is what we can now jointly put at the hands of our customers.
That's very interesting, and I do want to make sure our audience has the opportunity to ask questions, because I think this, brings up some very interesting points. Because what it stands to me, is that you're trying to increase the quality, reduce the time of the project, and I'm wondering, in doing so, by putting quality up front, do you get to do this? Typically people have to feel they have to trade off between time, quality, and cost. But to me, it seems like there's an opportunity here where you get all three. You can actually lower the cost because you're taking less time and you're getting higher quality by doing this up front. Am I reading that correctly, as a possible holy grail here that can be achieved?
Yeah. Well, it is if you not just follow the procedure of what needs to be done, but you focus on where it needs to be done. Yeah. So doing the right things. Yeah. Not just doing them right, but doing the right things. Yeah. And testing the areas of change, and synchronizing the testing to the progress of configuration. It is, this is a best practice in the proper sense of the word, right? This is the right, and this is the optimal way, of introducing quality assurance into projects, and that will result in a better result for the customer. It will result in a lower effort, because you're avoiding the indirect damage that is caused by a problem that is not caught, and then needs to go, maybe back to the drawing board. Again, bringing everything else that has been done in the meantime at least up for retesting, maybe even for redesign. So the tight integration that we have between the different settings in the system, the different areas that we have to touch with regards to customization through coding, the decisions that we have around the usage of master data, so attributes. It's not only the configuration part, it is also the design of the data architecture, basically, that you choose to represent your company. All these things have down stream effects if they go if they are done incorrectly and go unchecked for a time. So by going in as early as we can, and by having already the tests at hand, to go in, because we know what we're supposed to see in the system, because we're bringing in a templatized approach to using the system. This makes it possible. So it's a combination of the LeapGreat approach to implementations with the tooling and the methodology coming in from Tricentis, and it's a very nice fit that we're able to bring to fruition here.
Yeah, so to hear you, that what I'm seeing is this idea of bringing quality earlier, based on actually having a working system that you can actually see it, not only make sure that you can test it, but you find if design issues, you find them earlier as well, so that you don't have all this rework, replanning at the back end, which then makes you retest. And so it's all this, if I'm understanding that correctly, Bob, it's your modern approach, and then complemented with the Tricentis automation that really brings quality to the front part. So you're sort of front loading quality at the same time, like you're front loading the system. Am I hearing what you guys are describing correctly?
Yeah, I think, to use an analogy from sports, I heard somebody say, you only become a better swimmer if you swim, right? And then analyze what comes out of that, right? I mean, it's a bit like the same in what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, conceptual work is of course very valuable, but if you could do conceptual work with reality next to you, where you could keep changing reality and keep trying it, and keep testing it, then you will get a better effect. And so that's what we're trying to do, is try to instill this idea that you can build and refine, and you of course do the conceptual work as you're going along, but then test at the same time. And of course, Tricentis is the perfect tool to be able to actually structurally scale that, and make it happen very quickly. And then of course, now with all the automation that is coming in and AI and stuff, that's going to get even more advanced, right? That you can do this. So it's really like just enabling the customer to be able to fail fast, so that you can get the information, right? I was with a customer recently who looked at what we do, and in fact, it wasn't me, it was my colleague who said it. It was an interesting comment that the customer looked at what we do and say, hey, well, this will avoid failure. And he said, no, you're going to fail, but you'll fail right in the beginning, and then you'll see, and then you can fix it, and then you can move much better. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's putting the tooling in place that allows you to do that quickly and efficiently.
This is nice. I like this, Bob. Yeah, and I have to say that when I first got introduced to LeapGreat and we first started talking, it seemed like too good to be true, right? And I think our story, can also sound a little bit like too good to be true if you look at those numbers. But it is the customers, who see the effect and who then give us this fresh feedback that tell us, no, this is quite real. And we have got IT is a funny industry, because while we are mathematically precise, and ultimately it is mathematics, run by technology, if you would, we are extremely chaotic when it comes to planning and building whatever the software is supposed to do, right? If you want to build an airport, right, you cannot be as chaotic as the IT industry. You have certain norms to attain to. You have to make sure that your window frames fit certain standards so that they can fit to one another. IT giving this incredible flexibility incents you to do your thing, and letting the result, the software that you build, very often fail in unexpected ways. The rigor that is being put into the specification and implementation, and then the testing, with LeapGreat, with the LeapGreat method coming in, which is an industrialized way of implementation, with this industrialized way of quality assurance, there is true benefit. And this is not magic. It is rationally demonstrable. It's something can be taught. It's something that can be done, and it has real measurable effects. So I think that is the great thing. That we're doing something that is quite emotional because it is huge. We're showing a great contribution, but it is done, with means that are solid and that can be looked at in detail and can be applied, with following procedures.
Yeah. You get me really excited about testing, and that's not easy to do.
See, we're not expecting this.
Just in terms of wrapping, because we're a little bit over sort of our time frame. If I give each 30 seconds, can you give one key takeaway that you'd like to leave for the audience? Maybe Bob, what's your 30-second takeaway?
Prioritize testing and test early. That's it.
All right, and I would say the what you see is what you get transformation of LeapGreat makes possible to really implement in a rapid plug and play kind of way. Yeah, so it's nice that Bob mentioned something here in the Tricentis direction, but I think we have mutually come to appreciate where the benefits is, and we're very happy to be in this partnership, and we're really looking forward to engaging with customers jointly.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of the customers would love to see how this all comes together, and maybe as a separate session, we might want to try to schedule that, because so that people can see it a bit live in action. So I thank Bob and Patrick for joining today. It was quite an engaging conversation all around a topic that sometimes people might not be as excited about, but I'm pumped and ready to test. So thanks everybody for joining today, and we look forward to having you join our next LinkedIn Live as they get scheduled. We'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.